The story begins far away from crowded cities, in a quiet frontier valley where life moved slowly and people mostly kept to themselves. Every morning the villagers woke to the sound of wind brushing against the hills and the distant call of birds that nested in the cliffs. It was a peaceful place, and peace was something they valued more than anything else. But peace has a strange way of ending without warning. And that day started like any other until a young shepherd ran into the village square, shouting that something huge had fallen into the ravine. At first, people thought it was just another wandering animal. The valley often saw large creatures passing through, especially during seasonal migrations. But the shepherd insisted it was no normal beast. His voice shook as he described what he had seen: white scales, long wings, and chains glinting in the sunlight. Many villagers believed he was exaggerating, but curiosity and fear pulled them toward the ravine anyway. Within minutes, a group gathered and followed him up the rocky path. The path was steep, the stones loose under their boots. The closer they got, the quieter everyone became. The shepherd walked ahead, pointing down into the deep cut of the earth where shadows hid most of what lay below. But then the shape came into view, and all doubts disappeared. There, half buried among broken branches and scattered stones, was a creature none of them had seen in real life before. An albino dragon. Its scales were pale like moonlight, and its wings lay twisted across the rocks like torn fabric. Its breathing was slow and uneven, each breath sounding as if it might be the last. The villagers froze where they stood. Some covered their mouths, others stepped back in fear. Dragons were known in stories, but rarely seen, and albino dragons were believed to be even rarer. Some said they were signs of bad fortune. Others believed they were sacred. Whatever the truth was, this one looked hurt beyond anything the villagers had ever imagined. Thick iron chains were wrapped around its body, cutting into the scales. Some had dug deep into the flesh, turning white scales into dark wounds. Its back was bent in a strange, painful curve, a hunch that made the creature's entire posture look like it had suffered years of mistreatment. Few villagers whispered that it might still be dangerous, even in its weakened state. Others pointed out that its eyes, half open and trembling, held no anger, only exhaustion. The shepherd noticed it too. There was fear in those eyes, not the wild fire that would come from a creature planning to attack. No one dared to climb down into the ravine. They kept their distance, watching the dragon struggle to lift its head, as if trying to understand whether the humans above meant to help or harm. The creature's breath created small clouds of dust around its mouth, and each movement seemed to send a wave of pain through its body. More villagers arrived, and soon the edge of the ravine was crowded with people trying to get a glimpse. One older villager stepped forward and said they should send for help from another town. Someone else quickly argued that bringing outsiders into their valley could cause trouble. Another man muttered that creatures like this brought bad omens, and helping it might bring danger to their homes. The whispers began to twist into fear, and fear spread faster than reason. Even those who felt pity stepped back, unsure what to do. After some time, the village council was informed. A few council members climbed up the path to observe the creature themselves. They stared down into the ravine for a long while. Some studied the chains, wondering who had captured such a rare beast and why. Others focused on its twisted back and deep wounds, realizing the suffering it must have endured. But despite everything they saw, fear remained their strongest guide. One of the council members said it would be safest to leave the dragon where it was. If whatever had chained it came looking for it, the village could be blamed for interfering. Another said helping the creature could bring misfortune. Someone else pointed out that even a weak dragon could become dangerous if it recovered. Slowly, their words shaped the decision. The council told everyone that no one was to approach the dragon. They declared that the village could not risk anyone's life. Guards were assigned to watch the ravine and ensure no curious or brave soul tried to get close. The villagers accepted the decision reluctantly. Some agreed out of fear, others simply because they trusted the council's judgment. But a small number quietly felt the decision was wrong. Even as the sun began sinking behind the hills, the dragon remained unmoved. The soft glow of the evening light reflected off its pale scales, giving it an otherworldly look. The villagers noticed that the chains were old and rusted, and some pieces seemed to have been repaired many times. That meant the creature had been held captive for a long period, suffering far from any help. The more they looked, the more they realized the dragon had been trying to escape something terrible. Yet even in that moment, standing above a creature that clearly needed help, the fear of the unknown kept them frozen. Night came, and with it a cold wind that swept through the valley. The dragon trembled against the stones, trying to curl its wings closer for warmth. The guards stayed at their posts, watching from a distance, but doing nothing. Some of them struggled with guilt. They whispered to each other about how strange it felt to watch any living being suffer and not offer help. But orders were orders, and they feared breaking them. The villagers back in the town could not stop talking about the dragon. Some believed this was a sign of trouble coming. Others wondered if the creature had escaped some cruel captor and had fallen from the sky while trying to flee. A few people thought that maybe it had come seeking help, and they were the ones denying it. But no one dared to challenge the council dot. As the night grew darker, the dragon let out a soft, almost human-like sound, a mixture of pain and loneliness. It echoed faintly across the valley, reaching the ears of anyone who happened to be outside. A few villagers whispered that they should at least bring water or something to ease its suffering, but fear held them back. The sound faded into the cold air, and silence returned. By morning, the dragon had not moved much. The pale light of dawn revealed more details of its injuries. The wounds around the chains were swollen and dark, and the bent hunch in its back looked worse than before. One of the guards thought he saw tears near the creature's eyes, but he did not mention it to anyone. It was easier to pretend he had imagined it. During the day, small groups continued to visit the ravine from afar. Every time someone saw the dragon's chest rise and fall, they realized it was still fighting to survive. Yet no one knew how long it could last without help. Everyone expected the council to eventually change their decision, but the council remained firm. They insisted that doing nothing was safer than risking the unknown. But the universe has a strange way of sending help in unexpected forms. And by the evening of the second day, a stranger arrived in the village. He walked with quiet confidence, carrying a travel bag across his shoulder and a calm expression on his face. He asked for a place to rest, and the villagers welcomed him politely. They had no idea that this quiet traveler would soon become the turning point in the creature's fate. That night, while eating with some villagers, the traveler overheard them, whispering about the wounded creature in the ravine. He paused and listened carefully as they described the fallen dragon, the chains, and the council's refusal to help. The more he heard, the more concern filled his eyes. He asked questions, gentle ones, not demanding, and the villagers told him everything. Though they tried to hide their discomfort, he could see the guilt in their faces. He did not argue with them, nor did he judge them. But inside, a decision was already forming. The next morning, before the sun fully rose and before the council could gather, the traveler headed toward the ravine on his own. The villagers watched him walk away, unsure what he planned to do. Some feared he was going to break the rules. Others hoped he might do what they themselves had been too afraid to attempt. And so, without knowing it, the moment had come when the fate of the chained and wounded albino dragon would begin to change. The village council gathered early in the morning, long before most people had even stepped outside their homes. They sat in a small meeting hall made of old wooden beams and rough stone walls. The windows were open to let in the fresh air, but the tension inside made the room feel heavy. Everyone knew they had an important decision to make, and none of them liked the weight of it. The council members had heard that a traveler had arrived the previous night, and they were already whispering among themselves about whether he would try to get involved. Some believed he would stay out of their affairs. Others weren't so sure. But the dragon lying in the ravine was the real focus. Every few minutes, one of the members would glance toward the open window, as if expecting the creature to suddenly crawl into the village on its own. A messenger came in and bowed slightly, reporting that the dragon was still alive. He described how it barely moved, how its breathing remained shallow, and how the chains looked even tighter now that daylight exposed the details. The twisted hunch in its back seemed impossible to ignore. Even so, the council members stayed quiet for a long moment, avoiding each other's eyes. One of them finally spoke, saying the village had never dealt with anything like this before. Another quickly responded that this was exactly why they should avoid involvement. "If we can't predict the outcome," he said, "we must stay cautious." His tone was firm, but there was fear behind it too. Someone else argued that letting the creature die would bring shame to the village if outsiders ever learned the truth. But that idea only caused more debate. They went back and forth with worries, predictions, and excuses. They talked circles around themselves until it became clear that no one truly knew what the right choice was. All they knew was that fear made every option look risky. Outside the hall, villagers stood in small groups, whispering. Many were curious about what the council would decide, while others simply hoped the dragon would somehow disappear on its own. Some younger villagers felt sorry for the creature, but didn't dare say it out loud. The older ones repeated old stories about dragon stories, filled with warnings, curses, and danger. It made the younger ones hesitate even more about by the time the council finished their meeting. Their decision was the same as before. No one was to go near the dragon. They insisted it was too dangerous, too unpredictable. They even added more guards to the ravine path so no one would get close out of curiosity or kindness. But even as the council tried to convince themselves that this was the safest decision, doubt lingered in their expressions. They could feel that something about the situation didn't sit right, but they pushed the thought aside. Throughout the day, villagers continued visiting the edge of the ravine from afar. They stood on the higher ground, watching the dragon from a distance. Some held their children close, as if the creature might suddenly rise up. Others watched quietly, their faces carrying a mixture of fear and sympathy. The dragon, however, didn't move much. It lifted its head only once or twice, perhaps trying to see the people watching from above. Its pale eyes looked tired, almost pleading, though no one wanted to admit they saw anything human in its expression. When the wind blew across its body, its wing trembled slightly. But even that small movement looked painful. A woman brought a jug of water and suggested placing it near the ravine, but her neighbor pulled her back gently, reminding her of the council's orders. She hesitated, torn between compassion and fear, but eventually stepped away. It was easier to follow the rules than to challenge them. Later in the afternoon, a group of guards arrived to replace the ones who had stayed through the night. They climbed the path, their boots kicking up dust as they went. When they reached the top of the ravine, they saw the dragon lying exactly where it had fallen. One of them felt something twist inside his chest. He wasn't sure if it was pity or discomfort, but he knew he didn't like the way the creature's wings lay twisted and motionless. He whispered to another guard that maybe they should offer the dragon a little water. The other guard shook his head quickly, reminding him that the council had forbidden it. "We can't go against them," he said quietly. "We'll be punished if we interfere." They fell silent after that, but the uneasy feeling stayed with them as the sun began to set. The sky turned orange and pink, casting a soft glow over the ravine. For a moment, the dragon looked almost peaceful, as if sleeping. But then it shifted slightly, and a low sound escaped its throat, a small, weak noise filled with discomfort. A few villagers watching from above flinched at the sound, unsure how to react. The traveler, who had arrived the night before, stood quietly among the watchers. He kept his arms crossed and said nothing, but his eyes were steady, focused. He studied the dragon's wounds, the chains, the twisted back, and the way the villagers behaved. He didn't judge them for being afraid. Fear was natural, but he could see they were letting fear make choices that weren't entirely their own. He asked a few gentle questions: how long the dragon had been there, whether anyone had tried to help, whether the council had a plan. Most people avoided answering directly, ashamed of the truth. But eventually, someone quietly admitted that no help would come, because the council believed the creature was too dangerous. The traveler didn't raise his voice or argue. He simply nodded, as if absorbing every word. But inside, something stirred. He believed deeply in helping those who couldn't help themselves, and seeing the dragon in such a condition only strengthened his resolve. That night, the council met again to discuss rumors that some villagers were growing uneasy with their decision. They worried that someone might break the rules. They spoke sternly about consequences and insisted that the guards needed to be strict. They were trying to control the situation, but fear was making them harsher than necessary. While they talked, the traveler walked alone through the quiet streets. He passed by houses where people sat in silence, thinking about the wounded creature lying in the cold darkness of the ravine. Some wondered if any good person would ever come to save it. Others silently hoped someone else would take action, because they could not gather the courage themselves. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, the valley was wrapped in a soft silver light. The traveler stood at a distance from the ravine and watched the dragon again. Its breathing was slow and uneven. Its wings twitched from time to time, as if dreaming or fighting through pain. In the moonlight, the chains around its body looked heavier, almost like they were draining the life out of it. The traveler sighed. He knew the villagers weren't cruel people. They were just scared of something they didn't understand. But he also knew that waiting any longer could cost the creature its life. The next morning, while the village was still waking up, the council gathered once more to announce their decision publicly. They said the dragon was not to be approached under any circumstances. They claimed it was too dangerous, even in its injured state. Some villagers accepted the decision reluctantly. Others looked away with discomfort. But no one spoke against it. Then, as people dispersed, the traveler stepped forward calmly. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He simply asked a quiet but direct question. If a living being is suffering in front of you, does turning your back make you safer or just less human? The question struck the villagers deeply. Many lowered their eyes. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know how to respond without exposing their own fears. The traveler didn't wait for their answer. He turned and began walking toward the ravine. Some villagers whispered warnings. Others called out for him to stop. But he kept walking with steady steps, leaving behind a crowd unsure whether to be afraid or hopeful. And without knowing it, everyone in the village had just witnessed the moment when everything began to change. The traveler walked toward the ravine with slow, steady steps, as if he already knew what he had to do. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint smell of dew and earth. Birds called from the trees, unaware that the village behind him held its breath. People watched from doorways and windows, unsure whether they should stop him or silently hope that he would succeed where they had failed. The guards at the path saw him approaching and stiffened. They were under strict orders to keep everyone away from the dragon. One of them stepped forward and raised a hand, asking the traveler to turn back. The man stopped, not out of fear, but out of respect. He didn't want to force his way through or frighten anyone. He simply asked the guard a calm question. If you saw a person injured like that, would you stop someone from helping them? The guard hesitated. His mouth opened slightly, but no answer came out. The question hit him harder than he expected. He knew the traveler was right. If the one suffering had been a person, no one would have hesitated. But the creature in the ravine was something they didn't understand, and that alone made them afraid. The second guard shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at his partner, then at the traveler, and finally toward the ravine where the dragon still lay. He sighed softly, as if carrying a weight he never asked for. After a moment, both guards stepped aside, pretending not to notice the traveler walking past. They didn't announce it openly, but their silence was permission. Down the rocky path he went, the stones crunching under his boots. The deeper he descended, the quieter everything became. The villagers above watched him shrink in size as he moved closer to the creature they had all been too afraid to approach. When he reached the bottom, the sight before him was more painful than expected. The dragon lay stretched across broken branches and rough stones. Its white scales appeared dim and dusty, and its wings were folded awkwardly, as if they had been forced into positions they were never meant to hold. The chains around its body were thick and rusted, biting into its flesh. Its bent back curved unnaturally, a shape that spoke of long suffering rather than a recent injury. The traveler stood still for a moment, letting the creature notice him. He didn't want to startle it. The dragon's eyes slowly shifted toward him, weak but alert enough to sense a new presence. There was no fire in those eyes, no threat, no anger, only exhaustion and fear. He took a slow breath, then knelt down several feet away. He spoke in a low, calm voice, almost like speaking to a frightened animal. He told the dragon he meant no harm, that he only wanted to help. His words were gentle, steady, and soft enough to settle in the quiet air around them. The dragon blinked once, then twice. Its breathing quickened for a moment, as if unsure whether to trust the figure in front of it. The traveler didn't move closer. He kept still, letting the creature decide whether he was safe. After a long silence, the dragon's wings relaxed slightly, settling more comfortably against the ground. It wasn't exactly a sign of trust, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a beginning. The traveler slowly reached into his bag and pulled out a small bundle of cloth, herbs, and simple tools he carried with him wherever he traveled. He always believed one should be ready to help anyone in need, and this day proved that belief stronger than ever. He inched closer, watching the dragon's eyes carefully. When it lifted its head slightly, he stopped. When it lowered its head again, he moved forward by another step. This silent communication continued until he reached the point where he could study the first chain wrapped across the dragon's shoulder. The chain was thick, far heavier than what any ordinary person would use. It had links shaped in a way that suggested someone had crafted it specifically to restrain something powerful. But now it held a creature that looked far from powerful. The traveler gently touched the chain, making sure the dragon could see his every move. The dragon's skin twitched lightly, muscles reacting to the cold metal being disturbed. But it didn't pull away. He whispered another reassurance, and the dragon let out a slow exhale, almost like a shaky attempt at trust, carefully. The traveler took a small metal tool from his bag symbol, rusted at the edge, but strong enough to pry apart weakened bolts. He worked slowly, trying not to cause additional pain. The villagers watching from above noticed the way he moved, patient, steady, almost like he was treating a wounded horse, instead of a giant creature that could crush him with a single swipe. Minutes passed, then more, and soon the first chain loosened. When it finally broke away from the dragon's body, the creature let out a deep breath, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. Its wing trembled out of reflex, but not from fear. It was relief. Encouraged, the traveler moved to the next chain. This one was tighter, embedded deeper into the dragon's skin. He examined the wound carefully, noting how the flesh had grown around the metal from long years of captivity. It wasn't just injury, it was a story of suffering. The traveler's chest tightened at the sight. He worked on the chain with even greater care. Every time the metal shifted, the dragon flinched, but not violently. It was a reaction of pain, not aggression. He whispered apologies each time, even though he knew the dragon didn't understand his words. But maybe it understood the tone, the intention. The villagers who had been afraid now watched in silence. Some had hands pressed to their mouths, others clutched their clothing tightly. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A human standing close enough to touch a dragon, and the dragon not attacking or roaring, but lying still, trusting him more with each passing moment. After removing the second chain, the traveler stepped back for a moment. He could see the way the dragon's breathing changed. It wasn't steady yet, but it was less strained. He watched its bent back and knew he couldn't fix everything in a single day. But he could start. Sometimes healing began not with curing, but with kindness. He moved to the worst of the injuries, the chain across the creature's lower back, where the hunch was most pronounced. This one had nearly fused with the dragon's skin. The surrounding scales were cracked, swollen, and darkened with old infection. The traveler's eyes softened with sorrow. He knew removing this chain would hurt, but leaving it would hurt far worse. He placed his hand gently on the ground near the dragon's side to let it know he was still there, still trying to help. The dragon closed its eyes, as if bracing itself. He took a slow breath, focused his thoughts, and began working. It took time. It took strength. It took patience. The chain resisted him, the metal stiff and stubborn. The dragon groaned faintly, a low sound that vibrated through the rocks beneath them. The villagers shuddered hearing it, but the traveler didn't stop. He kept his movements calm, not rushing even when the metal scraped deeply. Finally, the last link snapped. The dragon flinched sharply, wings twitching. But then its body relaxed in a way it hadn't since it had fallen into the ravine. Its back still remained bent, but it no longer felt pulled by the weight of the chains. It breathed deeper, more freely. The traveler dropped the broken chain beside him and stepped away to give the dragon space. The creature slowly lifted its head, blinking at him with those pale, tired eyes. In that moment, something passed between them and understanding, a fragile thread of trust woven through pain. The villagers above watched in awe. For the first time, they didn't feel fear when looking at the dragon. They saw suffering, endurance, and a creature that had been hurt more than they had imagined. And they saw a human kneeling beside it, not because he was fearless, but because he cared. The traveler reached out slowly, giving the dragon a chance to refuse. But the creature didn't pull away. Its breath warmed the air between them. The traveler gently placed his hand on its neck. Feeling the faint heartbeat beneath the scales above them, the villagers realized something important. The dragon wasn't the danger they had feared. The real danger had been letting their fear decide everything for them. And somewhere deep within the ravine, for the first time in a very long while, the albino dragon felt something new hope. The traveler stayed beside the dragon until its breathing became steady again. He didn't rush anything. He didn't speak loudly, didn't make sudden movements, didn't try to force the creature to trust him all at once. He simply sat near it, letting his calm presence soften the fear in the dragon's tired eyes. High above the ravine, more villagers gathered. Word spread quickly that the traveler had removed the chains. People who earlier avoided even looking in the direction of the ravine now stood at the edge, squinting down as if unsure whether what they saw was real. Some whispered in amazement, some in guilt, and others in quiet relief that someone had stepped forward when they could not. The dragon shifted slightly, adjusting its wings. Even that small movement made its body tense with pain. The traveler noticed immediately and reached into his bag for something. He pulled out a small clay bowl and filled it with water he had carried with him. It wasn't much, but he hoped it would help. When he pushed the bowl slowly toward the dragon, he could tell it recognized the gesture. The creature's long neck lowered with effort, and its tongue gently touched the water. It drank slowly, as though saving every drop. The traveler felt a knot loosen in his chest. It was a simple act giving water, but to a dying creature, it meant life. He looked at the dragon more closely, examining the wounds under the broken chains. The skin around the cuts was dark and swollen. Some spots looked infected. He reached into his bag again and took out herbs and clean cloth. The villagers above leaned forward, trying to see what he was doing. He tore the cloth into strips and mixed the herbs with water until they formed a soft paste. Then, speaking softly to the dragon, he lifted the cloth and gently pressed it onto one of the open wounds. The dragon flinched, releasing a shaky breath, but it didn't pull away. It knew the touch was meant to heal Dot. He moved carefully from one wound to another, cleaning, pressing, wrapping. Each movement was slow and thoughtful. The villagers watching began to feel something shift inside them. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was something closer to recognition. Recognition that the creature was not a threat, but a living being in pain. A few villagers left and returned with blankets, just in case the traveler needed help or warmth for the creature. Others brought buckets of water and placed them near the top of the path, unsure whether they should take them down. No one dared go close, but they wanted to contribute, even in small ways. They didn't say it out loud, but their hearts were no longer cold. Dot as the traveler finished tending to the wounds. He noticed the dragon's breathing had become calmer. It stared at him with quiet eyes, as if trying to understand why he cared. The traveler didn't know the dragon's story, didn't know who had chained it, or how long it had suffered. But he didn't need the whole story to know that helping was the right thing. He placed his hand gently on the dragon's side again. "You're safe," he whispered. The dragon blinked once in response, almost like a slow nod. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the ravine. Above, the villagers shielded their eyes from the glare. A group of children peeked from behind the adults, trying to get a better look. They weren't afraid like the older villagers. Children often saw things with clearer hearts. One child asked softly why the dragon was hurt. A woman standing beside him couldn't answer. She looked down at the ravine and felt her throat tighten. She didn't know how to explain suffering that came from cruelty. She only knew it wasn't right. The traveler stood and stretched his legs, sore from kneeling for so long. He scanned the dragon's body again, planning what he needed to do next. The injuries were deep and serious. It would take time for a creature of this size to recover. He climbed halfway up the path and called up to the villagers, asking for water and cloth. At first, no one moved. They exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether they were allowed to help. The council had told them to stay away, after all. But the council wasn't here now. Fear wasn't holding their feet anymore. Finally, one villager stepped forward and picked up a bucket. He carried it cautiously down the path, his hands trembling slightly. When he reached the traveler, he handed the bucket with lowered eyes, embarrassed that he hadn't acted earlier. The traveler thanked him with a warm smile, and that small moment broke the tension that had been choking the village for days. More villagers followed. Some brought more water, others brought clean fabric, some even gathered simple healing herbs from the forest. They didn't go near the dragon. They weren't ready yet, but they supported the traveler from the path, handing him whatever he needed. With their help, the traveler returned to the dragon and continued tending to its wounds. He cleaned the cuts again, this time more thoroughly. He dabbed the swollen areas with herbs that eased pain and fought infection. He checked the dragon's wings, lifting them gently to see whether any bones were broken. Luckily, they were only bruised, though badly dot as he worked. The dragon watched everything quietly. It didn't growl, didn't snap, didn't even show signs of aggression. It simply existed in a fragile state of trust in someone who had no reason to help except compassion. Hours passed like this, with the villagers watching silently from above. The traveler could feel the dragon's fear slowly melting away, like ice thawing under warm sunlight. When he finished wrapping the last wound, he sat beside the dragon again, letting it rest. The sky turned golden as evening neared. The shadows in the ravine grew longer. Some villagers returned home to prepare meals, but many stayed, unable to look away from the quiet miracle happening below. They whispered about how the traveler had walked in with nothing but courage and kindness, and changed the way an entire village saw the creature. The council members eventually arrived too, surprised to see how many people had gathered. They tried to maintain authority, reminding everyone of their original order. But the villagers didn't react the same way anymore. They weren't rebellious or rude. They were simply calm, steady, and unwilling to let fear guide them again. The council members looked down into the ravine and saw the dragon lying peacefully beside the traveler. They noticed the broken chains, the wrapped wounds, the steady breathing of a creature they had assumed was too dangerous to help. And they saw their mistakes reflected back at them. Something inside them softened. They didn't admit it out loud, but their expressions said enough. Down below, the traveler poured a bit more water into the clay bowl and set it beside the dragon. The creature drank again, slower than before. Afterward, it rested its head on the ground, eyes half closed, but more relaxed than they had been since the day it crashed into the ravine. The traveler leaned back against a rock, exhausted but satisfied. He looked up at the edge of the ravine and saw the villagers watching him with quiet respect. He nodded at them, grateful for their support. For the first time, the village felt united not through fear, but through compassion. Night began to fall. The wind grew cool, brushing softly through the valley. The dragon lifted its wings slightly, adjusting its position so it could rest more comfortably. Its breathing was no longer shallow or shaky. It was steady, calm, hopeful. The traveler placed a blanket over the dragon's wounded shoulder, even though he knew the creature didn't need warmth the same way humans did. It was more a gesture of care than necessity. The dragon let out a soft sound, not a growl, not a threat, but something gentle, almost like gratitude. The villagers slowly drifted back to their homes, leaving the traveler alone with the dragon. But they didn't leave with fear anymore. They left with curiosity, respect, and a new understanding of courage. The ravine was quiet as the moon began to rise again. The traveler sat beside the dragon, watching the stars appear one by one. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how long the dragon needed to heal, or what dangers might come next. But he knew one thing for certain. He would not leave the creature alone. And for the first time since falling into the ravine, the albino dragon seemed to understand that it was no longer abandoned. The next morning, the valley woke slowly, with golden sunlight spilling over the hills and warming the stone paths. The traveler had stayed beside the dragon through the night, making sure it was comfortable and safe. He watched as it shifted slightly, testing its wings and moving its bent back carefully. Though the hunch remained, it was clear that the dragon's strength had begun to return. Each movement was small, cautious, and deliberate. But it was a promise that life had not abandoned the creature. Villagers started arriving at the edge of the ravine again, some bringing food, herbs, and clean water. No one dared go too close, but their curiosity was stronger than their fear this morning. Children peeked from behind their parents, whispering quietly about the white creature that lay in the shadows below. Even the older villagers, who had been staunch defenders of the council's decisions, watched in silence, slowly realizing that the traveler had done something extraordinary. The traveler did not scold the villagers for their hesitation in the past. He understood fear, and he understood hesitation. He accepted that people were not perfect, and that courage often needed a spark to grow. Today, he would allow them to witness the process, and perhaps some of them would begin to understand compassion in a deeper way. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, folded cloth to wipe away dried blood and dirt from the dragon's scales. He worked carefully, gently pressing the cloth over its shoulder and back, trying not to jostle the creature or cause pain. The dragon flinched slightly at first, but it stayed still as he cleaned away the grime. After a while, he set the cloth aside and examined the dragon's wings again. They were still bruised and battered, but the bones were not broken. That meant the dragon would eventually be able to fly again, though it might take weeks or months of rest. He carefully encouraged the wings to stretch slightly, murmuring softly, as if speaking to a patient friend. The dragon's eyes followed his movements, and it seemed to understand that the hands were there to help, not harm. Nearby, a group of villagers whispered among themselves. They could see the care and patience the traveler displayed, and some felt guilt for ever doubting or fearing the creature. Others began to discuss quietly what might have caused its suffering. Rumors of poachers, cruel hunters, and capture rings floated through the air. No one knew the truth for certain, but one thing was clear. This dragon had endured something terrible, and it had survived. The traveler noticed the whispered conversations and nodded slightly. He had no need to explain. The villagers were learning through observation, understanding that kindness and patience often mattered more than authority or fear. As the sun climbed higher, the traveler prepared a simple mixture of herbs and water to help with the dragon's recovery. He applied it gently to the wounds, rubbing softly to allow the medicine to soak into the bruised areas. The dragon remained calm, occasionally blinking or letting out a low, soft sound that was neither growl nor cry. It was a sound of comfort, a sound that seemed to tell the traveler that it trusted him. The process took hours, but the traveler did not rush. Each wound, each muscle, each scar received attention. The dragon shifted occasionally, testing its back and wings, but with every careful movement, it grew stronger. By late afternoon, the dragon attempted to stand. It rose slowly on its powerful legs, trembling at first, but holding its weight. Its wings stretched awkwardly, cracking softly from stiffness, but they held. The dragon's bent back did not straighten completely, but the effort itself was progress. A sign that life had returned in some measure to its body. The villagers above watched in awe. Some gasped quietly. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Children clung to their parents' hands, feeling the thrill of seeing a creature come back from the edge of death. For many, it was a lesson they would never forget. Fear could be overcome by patience, courage, and care. The traveler smiled at the sight. He could see the strength returning in the dragon's eyes. It no longer looked only fearful. It had curiosity now, awareness, and the faintest hint of hope. He stepped back slowly, giving it space to move freely for the first time in a long while. The dragon walked a few paces, testing its legs, before turning its head to look at the traveler. Its gaze seemed to convey a silent question, a recognition of the person who had saved it. The traveler knelt again and placed a hand on the dragon's scaled cheek. It leaned slightly into the touch, not aggressively, not passively, but with understanding. Above, the villagers could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The council members themselves watched in silence, realizing that all their previous fears were misplaced. They had assumed danger, cruelty, or disaster, but what they saw was patience, courage, and life restored. The traveler's example was teaching more than healing. It was teaching compassion. By evening, the dragon was moving with more confidence. It stretched its wings fully for the first time, testing the strength of muscles that had been weak for years. The traveler encouraged the movements gently, ensuring no strain, no sudden exertion. Slowly, the dragon lifted off the ground a few inches, hovering on its own. Then it landed, shaking its wings as though feeling the wind against them for the first time in ages. The villagers were silent, but awe-filled silence. The children clapped softly, unable to contain their excitement. Adults whispered quietly among themselves. Even those who had been most fearful now felt the power of witnessing courage and kindness in action. As the dragon rested again, the traveler examined the surrounding area. He could see the remnants of chains, rusted and broken, and he realized that the creature's suffering had not ended because of nature. It had ended because someone chose to help. And that was a truth too important to ignore. Night fell slowly, and the valley became quiet. The dragon curled near the traveler, wings folded, but still moving slightly. It had grown to trust him completely, even if it still remained wary of humans in general. The traveler stayed with it, sharing warmth and comfort, speaking softly in a tone meant to reassure, not command. Suddenly, a breeze carried sounds from the distant forest. The dragon lifted its head, ears and nostrils flaring, eyes alert. It was testing its senses, reconnecting with the world beyond the ravine. The traveler stayed calm, showing by example that there was nothing to fear. The dragon relaxed again, its eyes meeting his. In that look, trust had been fully established. The villagers above whispered among themselves. Some speculated the dragon might fly away at any moment. Others hoped it would stay. One by one, they understood that freedom was part of the healing process. Courage and kindness had brought the creature back from the brink, but it had to reclaim its life fully on its own terms. By morning, the dragon attempted to stand once more. This time, it walked to the edge of the ravine, testing the ground, testing itself. It looked down at the valley below and stretched its wings fully. Then, in a moment that took everyone's breath away, it leapt into the air, flapping with powerful strokes. The wind carried it higher, stronger than before, until it hovered above the trees, then above the hills. The villagers below watched in awe. Some cried softly. Some clapped in joy. The council members remained silent, realizing that the traveler had done more than heal a creature. He had healed their hearts too, teaching them the power of bravery, patience, and compassion. The dragon circled once above the valley, then slowly descended, landing gently on a distant hilltop. It turned its head toward the ravine one last time, eyes locking with the travelers. Then, with a flap of mighty wings, it took off toward the horizon. Disappearing into the golden light of the sunrise. The traveler watched quietly. He felt a deep satisfaction, not from glory, but from knowing he had made a difference. The dragon was alive, stronger, and free, and the valley would never forget the lessons it had learned. Villagers slowly approached, some tentatively, some with newfound courage. They thanked the traveler, but he only smiled and shook his head. "You did this too," he said. "Courage is not just mine. It is in everyone willing to care, willing to act." That day, the valley felt different. Fear was no longer the strongest voice. Compassion had grown, courage had been recognized, and a story of survival and healing had been written in the lives of everyone who witnessed it. The traveler packed his bag, preparing to continue his journey. The villagers watched him leave, some waving quietly, some standing silently, but all carrying a memory that would never fade, the day a human showed courage and compassion, and a wounded albino dragon rose from suffering to freedom. And far above, the dragon flew higher and higher, powerful wings cutting through the air. It looked down at the valley once more, a silent promise that it remembered the hands that had healed it, and the hearts that had learned to care. The valley would never forget, and neither would the traveler.